Good morning, Crossroads Church. Can you hear me? Hello? Am I on? Can you hear me? Good morning. How are you guys, North Glen Campus? It is good to be here with you. Good morning to you, Thornton and Fort Lupton campuses. And if you're watching online, man, what a wonderful day it is. Beautiful Colorado springtime. I'm still waiting for that big snowstorm that's going to come and just dump on our city. But, who knows if that will happen or not. But anyway, regardless of all that stuff, welcome to Crossroads Church. We are here wrapping up this morning our three-part series that we call Who Cares? We've been asking this question, who cares, for 3 weeks, because all of us find ourselves in those situations, in those seasons of life that are suffering and struggle, and we ask ourselves this question, who cares? Because in those times of need, we need help, we need care outside of ourselves, outside of what we can do for ourselves, and we need help, we need care. And so the first week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about that the author of life, the big idea was that the author of life, Jesus, is the source of care, that we were made by him, that he wired us, that he created us, and that when we need care, point number one in your outline is that the author of life is the source of care. There's a lot of places we can look for care, right? There's a lot of different places we can look for care, places that won't fulfill us, places that won't help us, but the author of life is the true source of care for the kind of care that we need. And then last week we talked about how God, who is the author of life and the source of care, has decided to implement his care to us in large part through other people, through community, this body of believers, the body of Christ, that we are commanded in Scripture to bear the burdens of one another as we carry each our individual loads. That was the big idea from last week, that we bear burdens, not carry one another's loads. This idea, this powerful idea of one anothering, that there's power in doing life together, that we need one another to bear these burdens that we face. And so if you missed one of them, I just want to encourage you, go online and watch the archives, or if you haven't yet downloaded the app, you should do that for more than just the sermon archives, but you can watch live online if you've ever gone, and also tons and tons of helpful tools for Crossroads attenders on the Crossroads app, so you can download that and go from there. But this week, as we wrap up this series, we're going to be talking about this idea of self-care. You may not know what that means, and we're going to kind of spend some time talking through what that looks like. But self-care specifically when it comes to exhaustion and burnout for you and me. And I want to start with a story that took place, that happened maybe, 6 or 7 years ago. And Pastor Matt and I, we used to take the high school and college groups backpacking every year. We'd go on a big 2 or 3 night backpacking trip where we would walk through the woods for about 15 miles. And if you're thinking, gosh, that sounds terrible, it is the most awesome thing you can do. There's just something about being out in the woods in the middle of nowhere in God's creation with everything you need on your back, and you have your own 2 feet to get you where you need to go. And so we used to do these trips every year, and we would do the same trail every year. And so one year we decided, hey, why don't we do a new trail? Why don't we do a new one? And so we started looking at maps, and we found one in Rocky Mountain National Park called the Bowen Baker Loop. And it's a great, great trail. It's beautiful. If you're into backpacking, you should go and take this trail. But we decided, hey, let's go on this trail. We've never been on this trail before, and we're going to take about 30 high school and college-age students on this trail, but it's no big deal, right? We have all the stuff we need. We've never been on the trail before, but we have our maps, and we have food and water and clothes. Like, what else would we need? And so we get up that morning, we get to the trailhead, and we are getting ready. We break up into our little hiking groups, and my group was the first to go. And so we get started, and the first about mile or so, mile and a half is flat and pretty gradual. But then the trail turns and it starts going uphill, and in the course of about 4 miles, we went up about 3,000 vertical feet. And so it's not like killer, it's not super difficult, but it's definitely not a walk in the park. And so we're working hard to get up to this first campsite before it gets too dark. And so we're walking up, and we're about halfway up. What happens in Colorado during the summertime in the afternoons, right? Yeah, the storm clouds all start to roll in, and it starts raining. And so there's something that happens when your body is warm and your muscles are working hard, and then they get doused in cold water. And what happened to me was that my legs just started freezing up. all muscle groups were like fighting against each other. They were cramping. I couldn't bend my knee. And then when I did get it bent, I couldn't straighten my leg back out. And it was this terrible pain. And I'd never had anything like this happen before or since then. And there I was on the side of the mountain, and I couldn't go any further. And I kind of had this dilemma. It's like, what do I do? I can't go any further, and I can't stop here because I'm just on the side of this mountain. And I cannot go back down to the vans because I'll be the laughing stock of Crossroads student ministry for years and years to come. So what am I going to do? And so I just start grabbing my shorts, and I start moving my legs like this. This is what I'm doing, and I'm pushing my knee back when I can't bend it back, and I'm literally walking myself up the mountain, trying to drink water, trying to stretch, and all of a sudden, we were in the first hiking group, and all of a sudden, the other group started catching up to us and passing me. And I'm thinking, wow, I feel really old right now. And they're like, all right, Chris, we'll see you at the top. And so I'm like getting no help from any of the students. And then finally, Pastor Matt gets caught up to me. And I'm thinking, great, like someone who's finally going to empathize with me. He's going to help me figure out what's going on. I mean, he's going to walk, he's going to help me out here. If I need him to, he'll probably carry my backpack, or like, he's my buddy. We're comrades in this adventure. And he gets up to me, and I look at Matt with desperation in my eyes, and I say, Matt, something's wrong. I don't know if I can make it. And he looks back at me, and he goes, well, that stinks. I'll see you at the top. And boom, he just takes off the trail, and he goes up to the top and beats me there. And so I'm there stuck. I'm chugging water. I'm stretching. I'm doing everything I can. And I force my way up the rest of this trail on this dang mountain where we finally got to our campsite, and we were able to camp for the night. But for many of us, that's kind of where we are in life. That's how we would describe this season of life right now, that we are there stuck on the side of the mountain, just struggling to keep going. And for many of you, you are drained, you're depleted, you're exhausted, and in a word, you're just burned out. You're burned out. And for many of us, whether you're at that point or not, or you're teetering on the edge of burnout, this is so important for us to take time to look at this idea of self-care, because the cost of burnout, the cost of not taking care of ourselves in a healthy way is high. It's crazy high, because not only is it important for us because it's miserable to be there, but also it can actually cause health problems in our bodies, that it can lead to increased blood pressure and all those sort of things, bad sleep and mood changes. We can have stress and irritability. We can be grouchier than normal. It's in those times of burnout where you can't concentrate and you can't make decisions, and maybe you just feel alone, that the littlest thing added to your plate feels like a ton of bricks laid on your back. But even more than this is the season of burnout when people lose jobs because of it, or they ruin relationships, or families can crumble. Kids can grow up with distant and distracted and burned out parents. And this is when we can make bad decisions in moments of weakness that have consequences for generations to come. You see, burnout is a big, big deal. And for those of you who are there, you're thinking, I know it's a big deal. There's got to be some relief. And so that's why we're taking this time to look at what does it mean for us to care for ourselves? What does it mean to take care of ourselves? And we're going to be looking at the scripture today, a familiar scripture. It's Matthew 11. If you want to turn there, please turn there. But what we're going to do, I'm just going to kind of tell you quickly what the rest of our time is going to look like, is we're going to look at these 3 verses from Matthew chapter 11, verses starting in 28. And we're going to look at what Jesus is telling us about rest, what it means to rest. And then the last about 10 minutes or so of our time together, we're going to get very, very practical with how do you take what Jesus is talking here, how do you take these principles and apply them to your life, to your situation, to your season of burnout today, right now, this afternoon. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So let's read Matthew 11, starting in verse 28. It says this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And we can read this and we can think, wow, that sounds nice, doesn't it? That sounds really nice. Maybe one day I'll be able to experience that kind of rest. Maybe one day in the future, when I retire, when I get my RV, or when this whatever season of the responsibility is over, then maybe that can be a reality for me. Or maybe it's not even until I die, that I'll have to die in order and be in Jesus' presence in order for me to experience that kind of rest and peace, because we're all so busy. And if you're in a season of burnout right now, these words of Jesus may seem so foreign to you and so out of reach. But I think that there's something here for us, for all of us, no matter where you're at. I think there's something here for all of us today, not in the future, but today. So whether you're completely burned out or you're running strong or you're somewhere in between, I think there's something here. And so let's go back to verse 28 and let's take a closer look at what Jesus is saying here. In verse 28, he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So he starts off these verses with this invitation, "Come to me." This is an open invitation. And I just want to stop and pause for a moment that for those of you who are here at all of our campuses, and maybe you're here just checking church out, and you're not really sure about who this Jesus guy is, and you're kind of skeptical about church or whatever, but maybe you're here just checking it out, and maybe you're here because you are in that season right now where you're burned out on life, and you don't know what to do, you need help, you need that care. Well, here's Jesus' invitation to you. He says, "Come to me." Like, come to me as you are. There are no strings attached. Just come to me if you're burned out, if you're tired and you're weary, and I will give you rest. This is an invitation to all of us. Come to me. And then he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden." Literally, he's talking about those who are exhausted due to severe labor. You're weary as though you've been beaten up in the back alley. You're tired from hard toil and work, or those loads that you've been carrying. Remember, like we talked about last week, how each of us have our own loads, that load you've been carrying is just super duper heavy. He says, "Come to me if that's you." And that's all of us, isn't it? It's all of us. In fact, it oftentimes when I ask someone, "Hey, how are you?" Or even when someone asks me, "Hey, how are you doing, Chris?" My answer will be, "I'm good and I'm busy." Right? We're busy. We have a lot of things going on. We're busy. And what makes this whole rest thing even harder is that for those of us who are burned out right now, it's not like we're just sitting around wasting time all day, right? It's not like we're just sitting around playing Nintendo all day long. We're exhausted doing good things like parenting. We're exhausted being good parents, taking care of our kids, or we're burned out because we're just trying desperately to keep up with the chores at home, to clean the house, to do laundry. We're tired because we're trying to sustain our jobs and our careers, or we're working extra, we're pulling extra shifts in order to make ends meet, that we're busy with productive and good things, important things that need to be done. And we ask the question, "Chris, rest sounds really nice, but what am I supposed to cut?" Have you ever felt that tension? What am I supposed to cut out of my busy life in order to find rest? There is no room to carve away any time for self-care. Well, as I said, at the end of this sermon, we're going to get super practical on a few ways that you can do that. You can actually carve away some time in order to do that, to care for yourself. But I want you to notice here that Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden," and then stop doing everything and spend the rest of your life not doing anything. He doesn't say, "Come to me and stop doing those important things." He doesn't say, "Come to me and neglect your kids." He doesn't say, "Come to me and quit your job." He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." You see, what he's implying here is that we are made to work. You and I, we are made to be productive, to contribute to things. We are made to take care of those things that we've been given, to be good stewards of that which we've been entrusted. And at the end of the day, you and I, we should be exhausted. We should be. We should be exhausted by doing what we should be doing, by carrying our own loads. And when our head hits the pillow, we should be spent. And in the middle of that is when Jesus says, "Come to me. Come to me. And this is the first part of the big idea today. I'm going to give you the big idea in 3 different sections. And the first part is this: do your best. Do your best. When Jesus says, come to me when you're weary and heavy laden, the implication is that you are weary and heavy laden with those things that you should be spending yourself on. You should be investing yourself. Do your best, Jesus says. And then in verse 29, let's continue. He says this: take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, what he means here when he says, take my yoke upon you, is he's using this word picture here, because a yoke is an instrument for work. It's a device that you would strap your oxen together, or your donkey, or whatever it is, and then you could hook your plows up. A yoke is to put a yoke on you is a word picture for activity, for something to do. And Jesus says, daily you need to take this yoke upon you and learn from me. In short, he's saying, be a disciple of mine. Follow me. If you want to find rest because you're weary and you're tired and exhausted, he says, follow me. Be my disciple. Take my yoke upon you and you will find rest. And it's interesting how he uses this word picture, to take my yoke upon you, because when we think of rest, we think of just doing nothing, right? We think of just vegging out, right? I mean, when I think of rest, I'm thinking about my favorite leather recliner at home and my favorite program on TV and my favorite beverage in my cup, and like the kids are quiet and the dog's quiet, and that's rest to me. But Jesus says, no, if you want rest when you're tired and weary, take my yoke upon you and actively be a disciple of mine. Follow me, and I will give you the kind of rest that restores your soul. Do you see the difference? We can go home and veg out, but Jesus says, if you want real rest, if you want rest that will restore your soul, follow me, and I'll lead you to it, who is the author of life. There's a lot of nonsense when it comes to this idea of self-care, because it's all over. I mean, it's a huge need, and so if you want to amuse yourself, go home and Google ways that you can self-care. And there's just a lot of nonsense about it. Like one thing that I found was, they said, go home when you're anxious, when you're like paralyzed with anxiety, go home and take your kid's little bubble jar and go outside and blow bubbles. And then as you watch the bubbles float away, just pretend that those are your anxieties floating away. And I'm like, well, I'll be honest, that sounds kind of fun. We might do that later on this afternoon, but that's not the kind of help that I need. Right? That's not the kind of help that you and I need, because we realize that there's got to be something more than just putting a Band-Aid on this. And Jesus says, if you want rest, I'll give you the kind of rest that you need. I'll give you the kind of rest that restores your soul. Take my yoke upon you. Now, this is where you might be thinking, Chris, I've been a Christian for a long time. In fact, I've been a Christian for most of my life. And so why, if this is true, if Jesus says, follow, be a disciple of mine and I'll give you rest, I've been a disciple of Jesus, why am I so burned out? Well, I want you to hear me on this. Because often we don't find rest, even as Christians, because we're not following Jesus into rest. You see, as we follow him, he will lead us into rest. And if we're not getting the rest that we need, it's because we're not following him into rest. Because remember how often he would go and take the disciples? I mean, he would work them hard, right? He would say, do your best. Go into these villages and teach and go minister to these people. And they would come back to him and they'd say, Jesus, look at all these things. It's been amazing. We haven't even had time to eat. It's been so busy for us. And Jesus is like, okay, then let's get on the boat and let's go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee and let's go rest. Remember these? Also, when Jesus would take time away from his disciples by himself just to go up on the mountainside to be with his Father. You see, often we see Jesus resting and leading his disciples into rest. And as we follow him, and I mean actually following him, going where he's going and doing what he's doing, he will lead us into rest. We work hard, and then we find rest. because rest is how God designed it. Right? Even in the creation narrative, we see this, how God did his best creative work in 6 days. I mean, speaking the universe into existence. And then what does it say on day 7? It says that he rested and was refreshed. He rested and was refreshed. You see, even from the very beginning, God set up this rhythm of life. And even that, more than that, rest is one of the big 10, right? The big 10 commandments. And it's sort of funny. It kind of makes me laugh a little bit how we look at the 10 commandments and we think, okay, well, let's pick out the big ones. We don't even realize we're doing this. None of us are going to say this, especially to somebody else, but let's pick out the big ones like thou shalt not murder. That's a big one, all right? I'm not going to do that one. Jesus, okay, thou shalt not murder, like check, I got that one done. That commandment, no big deal. I'm gonna do that one. But then we get to the one that says, keep the Sabbath day or keep the Sabbath rest holy. Remember to do this. And we're like, maybe. I mean, maybe. Really, God, okay, can we negotiate this one? Can we negotiate this commandment? Because can I just see how big my to-do list is that day? Can I just wait and see how many things I get clicked off my to-do list in order to decide if I'm going to follow this commandment or not? Or, Jesus, can I just wait and see what the weather forecast is to see if it's a good day? Maybe I'll take a day off and go rest. If not, I'm just going to stay home and get stuff done. You see, rest is a big deal. And Jesus lays out this promise and says, you want rest? Come to me and follow me. And you will find the rest that your soul is desperate for. The second part of our big idea is that we do our best. We become weary and heavy laden. And then we find rest. You see, these are both important, mutually important pieces. We find rest. We find real rest, restorative rest, rest that comes from the author of life. And I get it because it's way easier said than done, isn't it? It's way easier said than done because we all have busy lives that go something like this. Do. No, I'm not going to sing. But do, and then do some more, and then do a few of these other things, and then get the stuff done that I didn't get done last week, and then, and I forgot about these things I got to do, and then we do some more, and we do. And Jesus says, no. That's not how I created you. That's not how I intended for you to function. You are supposed to do your best and then find rest. And further, and even more importantly, our ability to rest is a direct reflection of our trust in God. I want to say that again, that our ability to rest is a direct reflection of our trust in God. Have you ever thought about it that way? Have you ever thought about rest being a reflection of how much you trust God? And let me explain, because when all I do is go, and do, because I'm the only one that can do it, or at least do it right. And you remember the old saying that says, if you want something done right, do it yourself. And so I'm the only one that can do these things, and all I do is do, and go, and rush. I'm just not trusting God. I mean, let's just face it. I'm not trusting God for any of that. I'm trusting my own ability and my own self to get it all done. And there's something powerful when I say, you know what, there's more to be done, and there always will be. But God, I trust you. And frankly, even if some of those things don't get done, resting with you and spending time with you is much more important to me than anything else. And so, God, I'm going to trust you. Even with these things I feel got to get done, I'm going to trust you. And so when Jesus says, come to me, it's not only an invitation to rest, but it's an invitation to trust. Because rest is one of the most meaningful ways that we can worship. Because it reminds us that He is God and that we are not. In fact, our ability to rest points directly to our understanding of God's sovereignty. And that leads us to the final point of our big idea, which is do your best and then find rest and leave the rest up to Him. Do your best and then find rest and then trust Him. Leave the rest up to Him. And that's the big idea of self-care. It's an invitation to this new rhythm of life. Do your best, and then find rest, and leave the rest up to Him. So I told you we would get practical. Now let's get practical. How do we do this? How do we do this? I mean, again, it sounds nice. How do we do this today? Well, I would say that the first part is this, is that the scariest part of this invitation is that it's an invitation. You don't have to respond to it. You don't have to do it. The scariest part of this is that Jesus isn't going to force you into a season of rest or into any sort of regular rest, that you can continue to just do all you want. You don't have to respond to this invitation, but you know where it's going to lead, and it's going to lead to burnout. In fact, for me, this is a lesson that I've had to learn the hard way. I don't typically think of myself as someone who has to learn lessons the hard way. I catch on pretty quick because I don't like to be in pain. But when it comes to burnout, this is a hard lesson for me, because I can think of a few significant seasons for me where I was there, where I was exhausted, where I was burned out, I was just ready to give up. And one of those happened about 8 years ago. I was the student ministry pastor, and man, things in the student ministry were going great. We had hundreds of students involved. Kids were coming to know Jesus every week. Kids were bringing their friends. We had a great staff and a great team of volunteers, and things were just going incredibly well. And then one night, it just all caught up to me, and I was fried. I was completely fried. I had realized that I wasn't practicing spending time with God. I wasn't in this rhythm of do your best and then find rest and leave the rest up to Him. I was just doing it all myself. I wasn't spending time in His presence. I was just running on my own strength. My Bible was dusty on the shelf, except for when I had to plan a teaching series. And that was sobering for me, is that I could run a successful student ministry and still completely neglect my relationship with Jesus. And that's true for you too. You can be a successful fill in the blank parent. You can be successful at your work. You can be successful, whatever it is, spouse, and neglect your relationship with Jesus. At least you can for a while before it catches up with you. And I had done that. I neglected all of it. And so I ended up in Pastor Kim's office one night, and with tears running down my face, just looking at Kim saying, Kim, I don't know if I can go on. I just don't know if I can do this anymore. And he knew exactly what I was feeling because he had also been there before. And he kept these books on his shelf called Leading on Empty by Wayne Cordiero. And he kept these books, and he gave this to me, and he said, Chris, you're burned out. You're leading on empty. You need to read this book because it's a powerful book. Because this book was written by a pastor who was burned out, and one day found himself on the side of the road, on the curb, with cars driving by, just completely lost it. I mean, weeping uncontrollably, just losing it right there on the side of the road. He ends up getting up and soon checking him. He quit his job as a pastor of his church, and he checked himself into a monastery in order to recover from this severe, severe burnout. Now, some of you are thinking, gosh, that sounds nice. I'll check into a monastery. Like, can I leave my kids at home and get some 6 months worth of peace and quiet with the monks? That sounds awesome. But this is what he did. And so he recovered from his burnout, and then he wrote this book about about his story, and also what does it mean for us to recover? How do we do that? What are some practical ways? And so this book was a game changer for me. It helped me look at my life differently. I want to encourage you to buy this. In fact, we have a link for it on our webpage under the sermon archive. If you go to this week's sermon, there's a link there. Or you can just go to Amazon and search for Leading on Empty. It's $10. You could buy it. And I just want to encourage you to get this. In fact, I want to give this out right now. Does anybody want this? And as I'm talking, you're like, man, that book sounds good. Who's the first person I can see? Right here. Come on up. This book is yours. All right? Everybody give her a round of applause. Yeah, way to go. Happy birthday. Is it your birthday? It's not your birthday. Well, then that's an early birthday present. Okay, you're welcome. All right. So anyway, this book, Leading on Empty, I started buying them myself and giving them out to people. In fact, a few years ago, Tiffany Dunn, some of you know Tiffany Dunn and her family at the Thornton campus. She came to me, and a mom of a young family, 3 young boys, and she came to me about 3 years ago and sat down in my office and had kind of the same conversation I had with Kim. She's like, Chris, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm fried. All I'm doing is all these things I have to do as a mom, and I just don't know if I can handle it anymore. I'm going to go crazy. I feel like I'm going crazy. And I looked at her and I asked her one question. I said, Tiffany, what does recovery look like for you? And she looked back at me kind of puzzled, and also at the same time, this light sort of turned on in her mind. And she's like, Chris, I don't have an answer for you. I don't have an answer. I don't know what recovery looks like for you because I have none. I have no margin. I have no rest in my life. And I said, well, read this book. And so she took the book and she read it, and it totally changed her as well. It just gave her a new framework through which she can set up her life. And what she started doing, so that was a few years ago. 3 weeks ago, she came up to me and she said, hey, Chris, I just want to thank you for giving me that book because it totally changed my life. I mean, it saved my life. And I'm like, well, that's great news, Tiffany. And she goes, you know what else is? I've been buying them off Amazon by the dozens, and I'm giving them out to my friends who are moms and others who are struggling in life just like I was. And so the thing is about the book is that it was written by a pastor for pastors, but it's applicable to anybody. So buy this book, read it. If you're there burned out, read this book. And what I want to do quickly as we get ready to wrap this up is I want to give you a couple of practical ways that he lines out in this book, more so in this book, but how to recover from burnout, okay? And it's the 3 R's. The 3 R's: reflect, recharge, and restructure. Reflect, recharge, and restructure. Now, these come in no particular order because they're all mutually important and sometimes have to be done simultaneously. But reflect is just kind of what it sounds like, that we reflect and ask ourselves the question, what are the triggers that cause my burnout? How did I get here? You ask yourself that question, how did I get here? And actually go through and name some things. And sometimes this is difficult, again, because we're often burned out by the things that are important to us. But go through and ask yourself the question, what are the things that trigger my exhaustion? I'll give you some of mine. For example, for me, one of my triggers is when I have unresolved conflict between me and someone else, whether it's my fault or their fault, whether I owe an apology or they owe an apology. If there's something unresolved between me and someone else, I can just watch my gauge of my energy level just start to drop. It just wears me out. It just depletes me. That's one of my triggers. I have to get things worked out. Another one of my triggers is when I just have seasons of unending seasons of busyness. You know, we can be busy for a while, but there's got to be a pause, right? There's got to be a change in our busyness. And when I have this unending seasons of busyness, I know what's coming is burnout. And another one of my triggers is just neglecting my relationship with Jesus. When I put the Bible down, when I don't have time for that, when I don't have time to talk to him, when I don't have time to reflect on his word and on all those things that restore me, that's when I burn out. It's a trigger point for me. The second piece of this is recharge. That you need to spend time to recharge your tank with things that are actually recharging for you. Not just things that make you idle, but things that are recharging for you. And recharging happens in 2 ways, with trickles, a trickle charge, and a burst charge. Trickle charge and a burst charge. And a trickle charge is just like what it says. It's regular, daily, purposeful recharging. Are you doing that daily? Are you recharging a little bit every day? Doing something that brings you into the presence of God daily, doing something that restores you, setting your mind on him in some way. I'm not talking about sitting in front of the TV again or doing something that's idle, but something that restores you. And this is huge. The trickle charge is huge, but at the same time, it's the easiest one to neglect. And the best way I can convince you of this is just like how you take care of your teeth, okay? How you take care of your teeth. Brushing your teeth every day is like a trickle charge, and then going to the dentist every 6 months where they like abuse you with that big machine in your mouth, that's the burst charge, okay? Now, none of us are going to neglect taking care of our teeth and go to the dentist once every 6 months and expect that to fix our problems, right? None of us are going to do that. We're going to have bad reports. We have to do it every single day, and we also have to go in every 6 months to get that burst. And so when it comes to trickle charge, what does this look like for me? Well, some of those things that I can do on a daily basis is go for a short walk or ride my bike or sit down and just spend some time reading my Bible and reflecting on God and who he is and his word to me, or maybe spending some time listening to my favorite worship music, going for a drive on a rainy day, or listening to podcasts that are refreshing for me, playing with my kids, or going out to lunch with my wife. Or how about this one? This is one super practical. You can do this tomorrow morning, is that when you wake up, before you reach for your phone to check your email and your social media, spend 5 minutes just thanking God for all of his blessings in your life. You see, it's the regular, it's the short, it's the attainable short trickle charges that we need to be doing every day. And then it comes to the burst charge, and this is just kind of like what it sounds like. It's these big seasons of refreshment. It's these big things that come our way, maybe every few months, maybe once or twice a year, but they're often bigger and longer and have more lasting impact than a trickle charge. And again, everyone is different. Some of my burst charges are when I get to go fly fishing. In fact, there's nothing better than going fly fishing with Jesus. Right now, you might be looking at me like I'm a lunatic, but fly fishing can either be depleting for me, like especially if I'm not catching any fish, or it can be recharging for me if I'm going into this activity with the mindset of, God, I'm going to spend time with you in your creation. I'm going to reflect on how you made all of this, and I'm going to be talking to you throughout the day. I'm going fly fishing with Jesus. Or a couple others of mine is when I get to go hiking or backpacking, basically anything in the mountains for me, just being in God's creation. Or some other burst charges, or when Renee and I get to go on a night away or a weekend away, or we take the family camping, or Renee and I do a big date night, or whatever it is. But again, all of these things are great, but not in and of themselves. They are a means to an end. And that end is that we get to be with the Father, the source of care. How do you charge? How do you trickle charge? And how do you burst charge? And then the final one is restructure. Are you living a life at breakneck speed where you have no space, you have no margin in your life? Maybe it's time to restructure some things. One of the biggest reasons that people don't take time for self-care is because I just don't have time to do that. I just don't have time. But I want to encourage you. You may feel like you don't have time, but it's not a time problem. It's not a time problem. I promise you that. It's a priority problem. And I assure you that there will be important things that don't get done if you take time to self-care. If self-care comes up on your priority list, there will be important things that don't get done. But I want to warn you not to let self-care drop so low on your priority list that that's the thing that doesn't get done. Don't let spending time with your Father be the one thing that doesn't get checked off that day. You see, the reason we get burned out is because self-care isn't a priority for us. And so we need to restructure. And here's a few ways you can do that, a few of the things I do when I realize I'm crazy busy and I need time to refresh. Is one of those ways is I just schedule it. I look ahead and I pick a day next month and I put it on the calendar. And then when someone tells me, hey, Chris, can you meet on this day or do this or that? I just say, I can't that day. I have a previous engagement. I'm already booked up. And what they don't know is that I'm going to go spend some time with Jesus doing whatever it is that we need to do. Right, so schedule it. Put it on your calendar. When you put it on your calendar, it makes it a priority. The other way that I do it is I multitask. I subscribe to several different podcasts of other pastors and leaders that I admire, that I get life from their words and their sermons, and I subscribe to those. And so when I'm driving to work or when I'm at the gym or whenever I have time to put some earphones in, I'm listening to these, not just music that makes my time go along, but I'm listening to things that will actually refresh me and recharge me. And then a final way that you can restructure is just to make a list of all the things that you do. Like, go home and get a piece of paper, make a list of all the things you do, and then make 2 columns and start separating those. What are the things that only I can do in one column? And then what are the things that I can delegate to someone else? And just start getting rid of some of those things. And get creative. Like, here's one creative idea. Instead of you making your kids lunch every day, teach them how to make their own lunch. And then all of a sudden you have 15 minutes out of your morning where you can use that for some sort of recharging. Get creative. Delegate to other people. But whatever you need to do to prioritize self-care and resting in the presence of Jesus and getting into this rhythm of do your best and then find rest and leave the rest up to Him. I'm going to pray as we close our time together. And as I pray, I'm going to read these verses from Matthew chapter 11 from the Message version of the Bible. And so would you pray with me? Jesus says this, are you tired, worn out? Are you burned out? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And Jesus, that is our prayer, God. We want to come to you and experience the rest that our souls need. And Father, I pray for those right now who are listening at all of our campuses, God, who are stuck, who are burned out, who are fried on life. God, would you meet them where they're at? May they follow you into the rest that you have for them. And God, that you would bring that sort of recovery that they need. And God, for all of us, we confess to you, God, when we don't rest, we confess, God, we need to rest more. We need to make it part of our life. We need to make it part of our worship. So God, would you teach us how to do that? God, would you help us to reflect? Would you help us to recharge? And would you help us to restructure? And God, we thank you for it all. And it's all for your glory and for our good. In Jesus' name.